All right, come on in, everybody. Welcome back to the Holler. Justin here. Going to be joined by Rep. John Ray Clemmons, who has been here before. You all know him by now. Before we get to that, tnholler.com is where you can find us at the TN Holler on Twitter and Facebook. Also, all these hollers across the state, all thanks to your support. We really do appreciate it. So subscribe and support at tnholler.com. And if you're buying or selling a house, do it through Elisa Parker. She's really supportive of us, and you can support us by supporting her. Okay, today, let us know thank you for the beard compliment. It means a lot. I'm really going for it. Tell my wife too, Mary, please. I don't know how long it'll last. Don't ask. Let's focus here. We're going to talk about what's going on with education here. John Ray has a lot of insight into this. Just to kind of tee us up here, basically a lot of this backlash, or not a lot of the awareness of what's going on stemmed from Governor Lee's State of the State speech, where he alluded to Hillsdale College and he called an informed patriotism partnership, where basically this private Christian school in Michigan was going to come in and teach us how to be informed patriots, teach our kids how to be informed patriots. And that's on the heels of all this talk about a student-based funding formula that they're trying to overhaul our public education system to meet. So my first question for you, Rep. Clemmons, and how are you, sir? Thank you for joining us, is, do you see all of these things as linked?
Yeah, absolutely. And first of all, I just want to compliment you on your beard as well. Your wife is much more patient than mine. I had one for a hot minute during the pandemic, and that came right off. So good work there. Yeah, so when we're talking about education, there's nothing more important to Tennesseans, nor should there be, than public education. I mean, the quality of a public education system controls everything, and it creates a domino effect across the board. And the entire economy, every community relies and depends on teachers and a public education system. And what we see happening now is simply the result of years of work and a lot of effort from on high. This isn't just coming from Tennessee. This is being delivered to Tennessee in a prepackaged box. And Governor Lee and his Commissioner of Education and others are just willing participants in this heist, I think you called it, and scheme to completely remake our public education system. And the point I want to make is everybody should have seen this coming. And what we're seeing play out here. I don't want to take any personal jabs or anything like that or anybody. But if you listen to what Governor Lee has said just in the first 3 years of his tenure, and Commissioner Schwinn, and what they have done, you can see all of this building up to this moment. And so I could go into, and elaborate more on that.
Please do.
You want me to go ahead and do that?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. So first of all, Governor Lee's number one agenda item coming to office was vouchers. So everybody knows private school vouchers, what that means, what the intentions of those vouchers are. Talk about stealing money from our public education system. Okay, so that was his number one agenda item. Of all the problems facing Tennessee families at that time, that was the thing that he rushed through more than anything. Then he takes the sponsor of that legislation and the only Democrat to vote for that legislation and brings them into the governor's office, paying them about $98,000 and $165,000 respectively to be his top education advisors. So this is who he has surrounded himself with. So now you've got him echoing ALEC talking points. And you heard when he came out in early October talking about rewriting the BEP formula from scratch, he started using this phrase, student-centered funding. Well, that is straight out of the ALEC playbook. It's straight out of their model legislation. So you know exactly where he's heading there. That's a huge tip-off. Then you have to look at the fact, when you start talking about funding and appropriately funding public education, after he passed his first budget, he went on the record and said he fully funded public schools in the state of Tennessee. Meanwhile, Tasser came out, an independent commission for the state, and said, no, 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 we're underfunding the BP by $1.7 billion per year. But he refused to back off this notion of fully funding public schools. So if he truly was fully funding public schools, this $1 billion that he's promising now, I assume it's just considered wasteful spending among
Right.
fiscal conservatives. Then you have to look at the DeVos effect. Former Secretary DeVos, her and Governor Lee are big buddies. They praise each other all the time. He brought her to Tennessee, toured around with her. She praised his voucher efforts. He used her to try to sell his voucher plan. This is the same woman who, let's remember, referred to HBCUs as the, quote, real pioneers when it comes to quote, end quote. And she's talking about, I think you posted earlier today, public money should be used to advance God's kingdom. So who he's trying to please when he's doing these types of things and facilitate this religious curricula into Tennessee schools and use public money for that purpose. The list goes on and on. ASDs, everybody admits, are a failure. No data supports them. He wants to revamp ASDs instead of just completely dismantle the system. And then let's get to the fiscal irresponsibility part, because that's key here, because he's talking about, investing a lot of money in schools. The question is, where is that going? So what is his track record when it comes to fiscal priorities and actual spending? So we don't have to look back far, right, with Governor Lee. Let's look at his $500 million of no bid contracts during the pandemic. He didn't make any hard decision, or really any decision. He punted everything to county mayors. But the only thing he used his executive power for was to enter into those no bid contracts to the tune of $500 million. We got the Tennessee on Me campaign. We got face socks. We got thousands of bovine insemination gloves. Like, these are the types of things that our governor was buying. Then let's look at the commissioner of education, who's out there, backing him up on all this stuff. Look at her record. $8 million contract to a company that employs her husband. When she was in Delaware, she helped land her husband a job with a state-funded education organization. In Texas, when she was with the Texas Education Association, there was an audit that found there were serious flaws in the organization's contracting practices. This is all just a select few items from what they have done and what they have said in 3 years and their own track record. And so, I didn't agree with them on a lot of things, but let's just look at what they're saying and what they're doing and not be surprised by how that's playing out and what the future holds with them in charge.
So a couple things I just want to seize on that you said here. And, at the end of the day, the first thing you said was this is his priority. So we saw when he came into office, the vouchers were his priority, right? He wanted to steer public funds to private schools. That was what he spent his political capital on. And a lot of that right now is hung up in the courts because he focused only on Memphis and Nashville because Republicans in rural parts of the state didn't want it at all.
Right.
So now he's talking about this student-based funding formula that you said came straight from ALEC, which we've seen is true. And he, in his State of the State, said, okay, we're going to put $1 billion into public education, which is admitting that we need it, right? So clearly we're not fully funding education if we need another $1 billion, as you pointed out. But then he said, we can only feel comfortable doing that if we get our student-based funding formula. So he's essentially saying, I'm only going to give more money to kids if you give me what I want, which is essentially, and tell me if I'm wrong here, but this is how it feels, it's a voucherization of our entire public education system.
Yeah, I think that's an understatement. Let's be honest. I mean, he's holding the future of our state hostage and trying to have a quid pro quo to get what he wants, which is to accomplish this, this objective being hand delivered to him from on high. And none of it is designed to improve classroom-based educational performance and outcomes for our public school students. This is about not only should I get to redesign the whole thing from scratch, as they said, but I'm going to hold this $1 billion hostage. Oh, and even if I spend that $1 billion, I'm going to spend it how I want and to whom I want. And it's going to include outsourcing arts education teachers. It's going to include setting up, possibly 50 new charter schools. This is a serious, serious problem. And if anybody thinks that we're overstating this or being hyperbolic, I would just encourage them to look at the track record and his exact language and history and what he is doing. He's saying, oh, well, none of this is going to vouchers. None of this is to further that program. Well, that's kind of missing the point, because the question is, where are those dollars going to go, and how's the system going to be set up for failure from the get-go? We already have an inequitable funding formula. We already don't account for the many challenges facing rural counties as well as urban counties. Everybody agrees that the BEP needs to be revisited. I think most of us agree on that. The question is, how do you do it? And are you truly going to use the process and the feedback you got from across the state of Tennessee to rewrite it in a way to make it more equitable and to improve educational outcomes for students in all 95 counties? That's not the objective here. Their objective here is to say, we're going to spend $1 billion more, and also we're going to control who receives that $1 billion. And guess what? It's not going to make its way into your public child's classroom.
Right. And so I'm looking for a clip. Sorry, I keep pulling up the wrong clip. But you mentioned the charter schools, and I think people need to hear that. He talked about Hillsdale bringing in this patriotism program, but what he didn't talk about was the 50 to 100 charter schools that he had requested Hillsdale bring to Tennessee. So I'm going to play that.
The governor of Tennessee has talked me into a commitment to start 50 charter schools in Tennessee by his sell-by date.
Okay, and that's Larry Arnn, the president of Hillsdale. Larry Arnn is a Trump appointee. He headed up his 1776 commission. He runs Hillsdale, which is a college in Michigan where Betsy DeVos's brother went. They have deep DeVos ties, deep Koch ties. And what they're doing is, they're not calling it private schools. They're calling it public schools. But John Ray, I would ask you, does a school become a public school just because it gets public money if it's privately run? It seems like now they've seen the issue that people had with private schools, and now they're just calling it public schools to get around that.
Yeah, they're gonna find any loophole they can to make some of their rich friends even richer, is what it appears, and to also facilitate this curriculum, religious-based curriculum, into the schools. And they're walking a fine line here, because they're kind of caught in a catch-22. They probably realize this, so they're walking a fine line. Hillsdale, they have a religious-based curriculum. They're not going to invest and do this heavy lifting, as that guy seemed to say it would be, to have 50 charter schools or open 50 charter schools in Tennessee, unless they get something for it. So what's their end game, and what's the governor's end game? And then it becomes, okay, well, if their curriculum, or if they're not doing it themselves and they're going to have somebody else do it, and they're going to call themselves a nonprofit and run this illegal end game, then is the ultimate objective not to have a religious-based curriculum in the schools? And then if they're public schools, you got separation of church and state issues. So it's
and on that note, so here I'm going to pull up this. This is the law, and the law says public charter school that does not promote the agenda of any religious denomination or religiously affiliated entity. And that's why at his press conference the other day, Governor Lee was very careful to repeatedly use the word secular. Right. But it seems like that is intended simply to get them around that part of the law, even though what they're really doing is steering money to these religious-based organizations.
Right, or they'll use a straw man in the middle. But either way, they'll funnel money to that entity, and for the purpose of setting up those charter schools. But again, it goes back. Why would they do that if they're not going to be able to promote their own curriculum,
Right.
which is religious based? And the governor can say whatever he wants with regards to secular or whatever. It's actually how it is going to come out in practice, and people need to know that you have to file a letter of intent with the Department of Education, and they've already pulled letters of intent from the Department of Education with the state of Tennessee. I think they've got Rutherford, they've got Montgomery County, I think Jackson, Madison.
Madison, yep, and also Williamson County, which doesn't get mentioned in the rundowns, but they did in Williamson County already. So it's
Yeah,
actually 4 already out of the 50. It's going to come quicker than you think. And then also there is this line in one of the stories this week. He's already proposed setting aside 32 million in next year's budget, half of it recurring to pay for their facilities. So, these are schools that are not simply just to help low income kids, and fly into communities with failing schools, which is kind of what the intent of charter schools were initially. Charters are now open to any Tennessee student. So what we've seen in Williamson County is Moms for Liberty, the chair, has been talking about these Hillsdale charter schools for months. And that's because she pulled her kids, and a lot of people like her pulled their kids out of school in Williamson County because they didn't want them to learn about, that Martin Luther King was black or something. And then now they are excited about these new charter schools that are going to teach a whitewashed version of our history from these religious-based schools that are going to pretend not to be religious. And on our public dollars it is a zero-sum game on some level. They're going to be taking our public school dollars and steering them to these organizations. And that's why John Ray said, and he was one of the only people I've seen say this so far, but I think it's important to call this what it is. He called it essentially highway robbery. I'm looking for your tweet, John Ray. Here it is. Highway robbery of your tax dollars in your child's public school. In the Wild West, they hatched a secret plan, recruit a posse, bought ammo and wore a bandana. In 2022, they just run for governor. Is it hyperbole to call it a heist? I don't feel like it is.
no, and they're doing it right in front of our face, and they're not even trying to disguise it. That's why, again, I just simply encourage everyone to just look at what they've done and what they've said. When somebody tells you who they are, believe them. This, what's interesting about this is if you consider, let's say 50 charter schools do materialize, they're not only going to be in the most populated counties, right? And we in Davidson County, Shelby County have been dealing with this challenge for several years. But these are going to be in rural counties also. And so rural Tennessee, whose public education system is already underfunded, and it's having trouble recruiting teachers already for a number of factors, including the fact that their hospitals have closed down because we haven't expanded Medicaid, and a whole host of other challenges going on in some of these rural counties that we're trying to address, or I'd love to address. They're going to witness firsthand the impact. And so their schools are already underfunded. So let's say 2 charter schools parachute in to Perry County or Carroll County. And all of a sudden, money starts getting pulled, whatever the per pupil funding per student is in that school system starts getting pulled to that charter school overnight when those students start peeling out. What's going to happen with that traditional public school? Because there are going to be children left behind. That's without a doubt.
And oh, by the way, he's got the state charter school board approval board rigged. So we've already seen Rutherford County locally vote that they didn't want one of these charter schools, and Lee's rigged state approval board overruled them. So even if you don't want one of these schools as a community, you're getting one.
Yeah, I mean, this whole notion of local control. I mean, maybe the Republican Party of the pre-90s, pre-2000s era, but the hypocrisy is running rampant, as we know, when it comes to this locally controlled spin that they use. Because guess what? If your school system doesn't want it, it's going to get appealed to the state. And they, by the way, have structured the state board to overrule you like that. And they already do. They already are, and they will. With the governor's objective is to put charter schools in your county. Guess what? your county's going to get charter schools, and your already underfunded public school is going to lose students, and it's going to lose money overnight to the value of each of those per pupil students on a funding basis. So it's this is, I hope it doesn't play out like this. I hope that we can do something, and I certainly hope the people of Tennessee step up, speak up, and let their legislative officials know that they don't support this, because the end game here does not look very pretty. And again, it goes back to the quality of our public education system. What is more important than the quality of our public education system and the educational outcomes in our public schools? I would argue not much, if anything. So
this is Richard Corcoran. I wanted to play you this clip before I let you go here. This clip is just on the note that you're striking there. This is the Florida Education Commissioner at Hillsdale College talking about exactly this.
Even if you had a Gwen Graham or Andrew Gillum or whoever come in, a Nancy Pelosi in Florida, you can't take those 500,000 kids and bring them back into the public school system. So you have to keep doing what we're doing as quickly as we're doing. Dr. Arnn was talking about Tennessee asking for 100 Barney Initiative charter schools. That's a game changer. Once you have that, and all of a sudden the governor leaves, who's fantastic, but Governor Lee's gone, and it's a liberal that comes in there. You can't bring put the animals back in the barn.
You can't put the animals back in the barn. So, obviously that's an extremely tasteless way of putting it, first of all. But second of all, what he's essentially saying is, once they get this through, the moment they get this through and they get these kids out of public schools and into charter schools, it's essentially irreversible. And all you can do is just keep sending money out of our public school system. What do you think when you hear that?
Well, I mean, I've got 3 kids in public school, and for him to refer to my children or their classmates or any of the hundreds of thousands of other children attending public schools across the state of Tennessee, it's offensive. And it should offend everyone that they consider them and think of them in these terms. But they, even worse, they only think of them in terms of dollars and cents and who they can enrich by getting these contracts and creating the system where they can steer that money to people who will be benefiting from those contracts. And for what reason? Again, if your end game, when you talk public education, if your end game is not to improve educational outcomes for children, you're doing it wrong. And if your outcome also is profit-based or has a profit motive, then you have no business in public office. This is not a profit generating business. This is an educating business. And if we don't start taking care of our teachers, appropriately respecting and paying our teachers and bus drivers and paraprofessionals and administrators and everybody who wake up every day and go to school and to educate our children and do the things for which they were trained, also being asked and expected to do things for which they were not trained or educated, because we all know everything that happens outside that classroom comes into that classroom. And for some reason today, we expect teachers just to be miracle workers and solve all the world's ills. If we don't start respecting them and treating them appropriately and paying them what they deserve and investing in our public schools, the entire state is going to suffer from this. Our economies are going to suffer. Our communities are going to suffer. And there is no good that can come of this. If we are going to invest in schools, let's get that money in the classroom to where it's directly benefiting the children that we're trying to educate. If you want to have a private school, start a private school, raise money, educate your kids, no problem. But don't expect to use public funds to make money or to steer it outside the public school system. It's simply, we can't allow this. I hope everyone in Tennessee really sees the threat that exists right now in the state of Tennessee and the direction and the path down which we're heading, because we've got to change course. It starts at the top, and I would encourage everybody to join us in this. This isn't hyperbole.
Okay, so as a last final thought, I know you got to run the committee. What can people do? Like, where should people focus their energy on this?
Yeah, what you should do is you should inundate the governor's office with phone calls. You should call your elected representatives. You should focus on the Senate and House education committees. You should make sure that every single person across whose desk this will come across knows where you stand on this issue. Education, no matter what poll you take, education is number one, and it should be. So are we as elected officials appropriately addressing the concerns of Tennesseans? I would argue that the leadership of this state is not, and I would encourage you to encourage them to do so.
All right. Thank you, John Ray. We're going to actually, on that note, grab some screen grabs of who is on the education committee so you guys can all focus on that. John Ray, thanks for coming on and talking to us. Come back soon, and I appreciate you sounding the alarm about this.
Yeah, right on, man. Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right. Take care. That's John Ray Clemmons. Thanks for joining us. I have a couple clips I can show you guys if you want to stick around. I just wanted to go back, as I usually do, and talk to Carlos, who doesn't agree with us about most things, and just answer this one question, which he said, bad-mouthing private religious schools. Didn't Rep. Clemmons introduce a minister pastor on the House floor recently? So he's not bad-mouthing private religious schools. That's not what he's doing. He's saying if you want a private religious school, okay, that's your prerogative. But what they're doing is they're now raiding the public school kitty, which is huge. It's the number one biggest budget item in our entire state. And then trying to essentially build literally with money allocated from our budget, which I just showed you guys, $32 million in next year's budget, half of it recurring, and it will only grow from there. As that guy said, once the animals are quote unquote out of the barn, talking about our kids, that they're using this money to build their essentially private schools by a different name. And Governor Lee knows that this is wrong. He knows that public dollars are supposed to go to public schools. And I can show you in this speech that he gave as he was giving a presser about his student-based funding formula, he was asked about this, and he made a point to say repeatedly, public schools. He knows that he has to say public schools, but they're privately run. And so, as someone said, sending public dollars somewhere doesn't make it a public school.
That specific partnership is about engaging Hillsdale in public, classical, secular.
Public, secular. So he says that over and over again, public, secular. And the reason that he's saying that is because we have a law about not promoting the agenda of any religious denomination or religiously affiliated entity. But what he can't change, as you can see from that same card that we made at the bottom there, is Hillsdale, and it says it's a small Christian classical liberal arts college. It's a Christian school. They're going to make some shell companies and start some charter schools and call it secular. But at the end of the day, what is really happening is he's filling the pockets of his politically affiliated partners, Betsy DeVos, Larry Arnn, Donald Trump, and they are Christian affiliated. And again, no issue with Christians, no issue with, if you want to have a religious school, okay, but it's with public dollars that we start to have a problem. And then as a last clip and a final clip that I just want to play for you, and thank you for sticking with us. This is a clip we've posted probably 7 times since we started the holler. We post this a lot because it's really important, but it's never been more relevant than right now. Because of Betsy DeVos's ties to Hillsdale, her brother went there. I don't know if she went there, but her brother Eric Prince, who started Blackwater, went there. She was on a Christian radio show. This is a while back with her husband. And this is before when she was becoming Secretary of Education. And she was asked, why not just fund Christian private schools? And what she basically said was, well, there's more money in public schools to advance God's kingdom.
But wouldn't it have been easier to simply fund Christian private schools and be done with it?
There are not enough philanthropic dollars in America to fund what is currently the need in education. We went on a trip to Israel with a marvelous teacher, and he really challenged all of us on that trip to be active in the Shephelah, where the cultures meet. Our desire is to be in that Shephelah, to confront the culture in which we all live today in ways which will continue to help advance God's kingdom.
Why waste your dollars on non-Christian things?
Well, I think it goes back to what I just mentioned, the concept of really being active.
So read between the lines there. I mean, you don't even have to read between the lines. Read the lines. Read what she's saying. It's not between the lines. I mean, it's what she's actually saying, the guy is saying to her, why not just fund private Christian schools? She says, well, there's not enough philanthropic dollars. There's not enough money to do what we want to do. Public education, we're talking about billions and billions of dollars. Governor Lee is going to put $1 billion in on top of what we already spend in our budget, but only if we cut the strings on those funds and make it so that they follow kids, student-based funding formulas, and so that they follow them right out the door, animals out of the barn, to these public, but not really, charter schools, which is going in the pockets of his friends. And this has been his priority all along. Now, I don't know what's really motivating him. I can't tell you if he's really just motivated by the money, for all the money. That's a simple answer. Or if this is a, religiously motivated agenda, which, I mean, Betsy DeVos has enough money. Governor Lee has enough money. They have a lot of money. So, or maybe it's political. Maybe it's their political ambition at the heart of this. Maybe it's all of it. But this has been his focus since he got to office. First, it was his vouchers. Those got held up because thankfully we have courts that mind the Constitution. And now he's come back and trying to voucherize our entire public education system. Are we going to let it happen? I mean, in my opinion, the only thing stopping him is you and us and awareness and letting people know what's going on. And Carlos, private citizens should be able to have their taxes go to private schools. No. That's not how it works to be in a society, brother. You can spend your money on private schools, but if we all say, oh, I don't want to put my money into public school system, we don't have a public school system anymore. So what you're saying there, and by the way, what you just said right there, that's what Governor Lee thinks. So you're saying what he's thinking. And actually, I would have more respect for him if he would just stand up at a presser and say what you're saying there. I don't believe in public schools. People should take their money, not pay for public schools, and go to private school. That's what he thinks. So what you're saying is what he thinks. And you're at least saying it. I completely disagree with you. We need a public school system, just like we need roads, just like we need a military, just like we need, anything public, water and, public services to have a community. Public schools is one of them. So I completely disagree with you. But at least you're saying what you believe. Like, come with me on the journey then, Carlos, to realize that Governor Lee should just say that. But what he's really doing is saying, no, I'm a friend of public schools. And, oh, these charters are public schools now. And pretending otherwise. He believes what you're saying, but he's not saying what you're saying. And that is a scam and a heist. Public or private, your choice. Pro-choice. Yes, you do have a choice. You can go to private school. I went to private school. My kids are going to public school. That's our choice. But we make a decision as a community to live in a country that has public schools that are the foundation of what this country is built on. We need to make sure everybody has a baseline. And if we all start peeling away and doing what we want to do with our money, and we don't require some sort of contribution to a public school system, there's not a baseline for people with less. And the bottom falls out. And I don't want to live in that world. And if you want to go run for office and get enough people to run for office on forget public schools, put your money where you want, good luck. It's not popular. But if you want to go run for office and get our laws changed and make that happen, go for it. You have the right to do that. But Governor Lee knows that's not popular to say. So he's not saying it, but he's doing it. And that's a scam. That's a scam. He is running a scam. And how many of us are going to let him do it? And how many of us are going to speak up? John Ray's speaking up. Is your representative speaking up? And by the way, I think this is bipartisan. I think if you get enough information to your representative, your Republican representatives, even, they're not going to like this either. Those vouchers, this was a vouchers on a much smaller level. The vouchers that they tried to pass barely passed. They had to offer military bribes to get those things passed. Literally. And it only passed on the House floor when they held the board open for like a half hour, which I've never, ever seen before. And at the last second, Jason Zachary, who's a real piece of work, flipped his vote. I don't know what they gave him. Something. He flipped his vote. And that's how vouchers got passed. This now is voucherizing our entire public school system. And so I don't think, and by the way, that's going to happen in rural parts of the state also. You're not putting 50 to 100 charter schools in Memphis and Nashville only. No, Rutherford County's getting them. Madison's getting them. Williamson County getting them. It's going to be all over the place with public money. I don't think that's popular. And I think right now the challenge is to educate people about this. So I hope you guys will take this information, send this link, share it. Maybe we'll pull some clips, but it's on us now to spread this information, and you need to help with that. Carlos is saying, what are the salaries of the Tennessee teacher union folks? We don't have unions here. You say this every day. Every time I talk about this, you start talking about teachers unions. It's not about that. Teachers don't get paid well here. They make basically less than they made 10 years ago. You're on the wrong track, Carlos. Basically everything you've said, wrong track. I'm trying to help you see it. You can want to see it or you cannot want to see it, but it's what it is. So thanks for following along as always, and focus your energy now on the education committees, and we'll post what that is later. See you next time.